Exhaustion. Welcome to 1+1, where my guest is rock singer Jimmy Barnes.
Like a quiet girl.
Jimmy was the lead singer of the iconic 70s and 80s rock group Cold Chisel. In 2015, he told 1+1 about his family's departure from Scotland and his early life of family violence and neglect. Now he's written the second instalment of his autobiography called Working Class Man. It describes how the emotional trauma of his young life came to haunt him as an adult, as he navigated life on the road as a performer and a recording artist, washed down with drugs and alcohol and pent-up aggression. These days, Jimmy's a reflective singer and musician who's glad to be alive and a devoted husband and family man. Jimmy Barnes, it's great to see you back on 1+1.
Nice to see you again.
Jimmy, reading or researching you has been absolutely exhausting. Did it feel the same way for you researching your life?
It wasn't as exhausting as living it. Now, you know what, reliving it, to sitting there, thinking about it and trying to, get it all back in order and think about it was pretty exhausting. Yeah, it was sort of and pretty emotional, because like you do a lot of the stuff you do, whether it was for the childhood or even as an adult, it's just done on at such breakneck pace. You're on the road all the time and you don't sit back and really sort of, think about a lot of it, and when you start looking back on it, you think, God, just the miles I travelled is exhausting.
So when you were doing the writing of both books, and you came to something that was really emotional, what would you do?
Well, the part of what I liked about writing was the fact that I had this opportunity to sit with the feelings, because I've ran away from feelings forever. If anything felt sort of remotely uncomfortable, I immediately got drunk or got hammered or did something, just whatever it was, anything to stop feeling.
You said that watching the movie about the bodies in the barrel, the Snowtown movie, unleashed a whole lot of stuff about your home in Adelaide.
Yeah.
What were the similarities?
The start of that movie, Snowtown, the street that they filmed on looked like the street I grew up in Elizabeth West, and the house that the main character lived in, which was a housing trust house in Elizabeth. It could have been Elizabeth West. It looked like my street. That looked like my house as well, And I just remember by the time when my mum left and it was just my dad was there and he was drinking a lot, our house looked just like there was holes in the walls and the doors were ripped off the hinges and, there was people walking through all the time and strangers. And just it really physically reminded me of, probably, the characters in there. There was all sorts of violence and just the language and, my family weren't serial killers as far as I know. But the movie did trigger a lot of physical memories.
There's that phrase about, show me a boy at 7 and you have seen the man. I mean, do you definitely think that was you? I
think what I was at 7 and what I was at 55 or whatever were radically different. Because what I went through as a child, which is what a lot of people go through, and it was like, a lot of violence, a lot of domestic violence, alcoholism, in the family. Poverty. Promiscuity, abuse, fear, all that stuff really shaped and twisted, who I became. I was essentially the same person, but the impact of all that trauma and stuff like that, which I'd never thought about really, over the period of 50 years, really sort of took me to another place. It made me, it changed the way I felt, the way I related to people, the way I my own self-worth, all that sort of stuff.
And it's amazing how your family, so your dad, who was a prize fighter, an amateur prize fighter, your mum Dorothy, and the 6 siblings. It's like all that angst was transported from Glasgow to Australia.
Well, really, yeah. One of the things I realized that my mum and dad, and I think particularly my mother, she was running away from their past, trying to get my father away from his, my dad was a gambler and a womanizer and an alcoholic, and I make fun of it. I say that they were his good points, but he was a good guy, but he was wild, And my mum thought that running away to Australia would get them away from that, and they could start new. start fresh. But unfortunately, as we, we probably all realize, you just run away and you take the problems with you. And basically, she came, 12,000 miles from Scotland to Australia and had all the same problems to deal with, only she didn't have any support. She didn't have her mother, didn't have her sisters, didn't have her friends. She was in a different culture. My dad got wilder. So basically she had the same problems, only they sort of became worse.
I thought it was really lovely how your son, David Campbell, after reading your first book, said that it gave him a huge sense of understanding and a sense of closure. Has writing given you closure? It has
a lot, yeah. If I hadn't have done that, I wouldn't have been able to heal. I wouldn't have been able to get over it. Eventually it would have killed me, and it came close. So yeah, it's given me some sort of closure, but more than closure, it's opened up a lot of doors too for me, which is a good thing. I'd rather see what I've got to deal with and then be able to charge into it and deal with it, as opposed to sort of closing the door behind me.
You talk about a time in 2012 where you felt that, that was it, all that sort of earlier stuff and the alcohol and the drugs, that was over. But you mentioned also that you had been sitting in a hotel room in New Zealand with a rope around your neck.
Well, the thing was, and this is the worst part, I sort of joke about it in the book, where for years, anytime anybody asked me about anything, if I was, if I was worried about myself like I've lost good friends along the way, who committed suicide, and I used to just sort of say, and it was a way of sort of trying to, allay fears. I'd say, I'm homicidal, not suicidal, and really it was the opposite, and what I was doing, I guess, and it was as much for my benefit as anybody else's. It was just this bravado thing. The way I was brought up, and as a Glaswegian from immigrant, was you don't show weakness. When the fact was, I was afraid of everything. I was afraid of the dark. I was afraid of looking at my life. I was afraid of who I was. I was afraid of where I come from. I remember as an 8-year-old running away from home and going and sitting on the jetty, at Glenorg, because it was so much damage being done at home by the family, by my mum and dad, and I'd run away and I'd sit on the end of the jetty, and I literally, even then, I used to think about jumping in and swimming off, not because I wanted to commit suicide, but just because I couldn't cope. So
sitting in a hotel with a rope around your neck.
When that happened, it was such a strange thing, because I didn't even realize I'd done it. I just, Jane and I were dealing with all the crap that I'd lived through, and that I'd created myself, and all that stuff, and the drugs and the booze and all that sort of stuff. It was killing me, and I remembered, I was feeling at my wit's end, but I never thought about I never thought I'm just going to go and end myself. I never thought about that at all. But that night, I remember I went to bed and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, so I grabbed everything from the minibar. There was like 2 bottles of bourbon, 2 bottles of scotch, 2 bottles of gin, 2 bottles of vodka, 2 bottles of brandy, and all this size, and I stacked them on the bedside table next to me, and I proceeded to just drink them down and to try to knock myself out to sleep, so I wouldn't think anymore, wouldn't feel. And in that process, I was taking sleeping tablets to go to sleep, and I woke up the next day and I felt like, oh, I slept. It was like I was sort of more passed out than slept in those days. And I remember I walked into we had a big, huge suite. I feel really ungrateful with it, because I had everything, but I had nothing. I walked into the dressing room of this suite, and I was just getting my jeans on, and then I seen this dressing gown cord tied around a rail, and that's when it started coming back to me. It was like watching an old movie. It was sort of scratchy and unclear, and then I remembered it. I remembered I'd got out of bed, and I was just thinking, because I was thinking about how people could kill themselves, and I thought, it can't be that easy to do. And I tied it and I hung my whole weight, and I lay there with this around my neck, and it's not that easy to die. It's not that easy. Well, I don't know, maybe I got a tough head or something, I don't know, but it's not that easy to die.
That's amazing, because that's 5 years ago, which doesn't seem that long.
No, it doesn't seem that long ago, but 5 years is a lifetime when you start living.
Absolutely.
And for 30 years prior to that, unbeknownst to me, I'd been dying rather than living. It's just a matter of time. I look back A lot of my sort of wildness is on film and in the public eye. And I think about it, if anybody looks at me, I'd spent 40 years trying to drink and party myself to death until 5 years.
Let's go back over some of that time.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's an amazing time, isn't it?
It is. I'm happy
you
to.
and this group of guys set off from Adelaide.
Yeah.
I think you were 16 and a half at
Yeah.
the time, and you built the reputation of Cold Chisel in the early days, as you say, gig by gig.
Yep.
And one day in the mid-70s, your dad shows up. Not your stepfather, who you took his name, Reg Barnes.
Yeah.
Your dad.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And when he showed up at the pub, what did you think?
So I was a bit shocked to see him, but I was excited because I was happy to see him, because he, no matter what faults he had, he had this certain smile about him, and the way he was just warm, But once I spoke to him, and I realised he was really out of it. He's still he was really drunk, and really I think he only turned up because he wanted money, and that really hurt, and I was sort of because we just sort of started getting a few articles in the paper, and he must have read that we were doing okay and thought I can hit him up for a loan. And and I was sort of angry about it at the time, but looking back on it now, my dad had a lot of soul searching and a lot of my dad could have done with writing a few books himself to get through some of this, and eventually he did work through a lot of this stuff, but he wasn't at that time. He wasn't there yet. And it was difficult.
Your mum, who I think died while you were editing your first book, you bought her a beautiful house. You tried to give her a better life after you had money.
Yeah.
And she resented that for some reason.
Well, she wasn't comfortable with it. She'd grown up with nothing, She'd always had nothing, and it was strange. And when I started doing well, my mum would sort of, you think you're too good now, your toffee mates over there, and you keep all your money. And I actually wanted her to spend time with my kids. I'd bought a place in the Southern Highlands, and it was beautiful on a hill and all that sort of stuff. And I wanted my mum to have a bit of pleasure. She'd scratched all her life to make a living, and she was poor. And so I bought her this place next door to mine, and it looked straight down this gorgeous looking valley. It was, open fireplace, a lovely, beautiful home, so she could be next door to us, and so she could see her grandkids. And she moved in, and she didn't come. She didn't come and see the grandkids. She just wasn't comfortable there, and that's and not only that, she resented the fact that she thought I'd sort of forced it on her, and and she eventually moved back to Elizabeth, and I remember saying, Mum, you can come and get your house. Your house is here. Sure, I don't want my house. It's not my house. And I said, well, it is your house. I bought it. It's not my house. I don't want it. Sell it. And I'm going, all right. So I sold it. And then when I sold it, she told my brothers and sisters that I threw her out. So, she just couldn't cope,
And you never managed to have a real heart-to-heart conversation with her before she died?
No, my mum's heart was well guarded, but and she, I could see in her eyes that she wanted to talk to us, but she, when you live with what she'd been through for so long, it became her reality. She couldn't see any different. I couldn't say, Mum, you bloody neglected us, because it would have hurt her. And so anything that hurt her, she's like me. Anything that threatens me, that was one of the things about homicidal and suicidal. Anytime I was threatened, I'd get aggressive. Anything that would hurt my mum, she would put the defenses up and shut it out. And so she would just, she couldn't talk about any of this stuff. I'd never brought it up. Even on her deathbed, she was, tight-lipped and, serious and, hard.
Was that hard for you then, to say goodbye to her knowing there was all this stuff that hadn't come out?
And you know what? It was probably better we didn't talk about it. It was probably better because it would have, she wouldn't have seen what I was trying to talk about, and she couldn't have told me how she felt. And it would have just, caused more grief. There was a few points. One when she was on her deathbed, where I sat holding her hand, where I was talking to myself in my head to her. I'm just saying, Mum, we've been through everything. We don't need to. There's no pain. I don't feel bad. I don't want you to feel bad. Whatever you believe is good, and whatever I believe is fine. Just be at peace, And I remember there was we're all sitting around, and she's tough, my mum. They put her on palliative care and said she'd last a few days, and she lasted 10 days or something. And they kept giving her more drugs so that she would be in a coma, so she'd drift quietly away, and she just wouldn't go. And we were all sitting around, and it was really mournful, and nobody was talking. We were sitting around, taking turns holding her hand, and I remember thinking it's too quiet, So I got my iPhone and I'd loaded up this playlist for her, and it was bagpipe music, right? So I turned it on. It was sort of this loud bagpipe music, and my mum hadn't opened her eyes, hadn't spoken for days, and I was holding her hand. I put it on. Lay it on a bed next to her, and I could see her eyes flickering, and it was like she was fighting her way back down the tunnel, from death's door to come and see us one last time. And I remember, and her eyes opened up. And she squeezed my hand, and then she shut them and gone. And that was it. So it was like, she made the journey back. I think she was at peace at that point. She made the journey back to let us know she was all right. So a lot of stuff that was unsaid, but, it doesn't need to be said.
I've been dying to ask you about Countdown, because Cold Chisel refused to go on Countdown for quite a while. You were asked to change some of your lyrics.
Yeah.
And, at a time where Countdown was kind of Australian youth culture, you probably had quite a different perspective until Cold Chisel performed, and of course things went pretty nuts after that.
Yeah.
I wonder, what did you feel about Molly and Countdown at the time?
Countdown at the time, it was like, there was a lot of us. There was a lot of bands, like the Oils, for instance, who just refused to go on. And, we sat there, and we were a big band by that point. We'd played a lot of live shows, like I said. We had, the record come out. We're filling halls. But Countdown, we'd see terrible bands. We'd go on Countdown one night and be playing stadiums the next week, because they'd sell that many records. So Cold Chisel were a very very staunch band that really wanted to play real music to our fans.
You guys were authentic.
We were authentic, but we were smart too. We knew that Countdown had that effect, and we knew that if we wanted to play real good music to real people, we could get to a lot of them in a hurry by playing Countdown. So we sort of had to compromise. It was part of the deal, was we'll compromise our principles to get on there so that we could play good music to people. And we got there, they asked us to come on and play Khe-Sanh, and then we thought, all right, which was like, it's the least Countdown-y sort of song there was, They wanted us to mime. The band never mimed. We played live. And then they said, you can sing, but we want you to change the lyrics, because we they didn't want us to say the legs were often open and their minds were always closed. It was too risque. And we just said, no, we're not changing the words. And so we didn't go on. It took till the next record, I think, before we finally went on.
Looking like a quiet girl. She's crying like a refugee.
By that point, we knew the value of Countdown. Countdown, for anybody who doesn't know, it was like MTV in its own way. Countdown made and broke bands or destroyed them.
It was hugely influential.
And Molly, with all his faults and Molly loved Australian music, and he was a champion of music. He loved music, full stop.
You talk about playing Khe-Sanh on Countdown. As you said, the lyrics and that music wasn't exactly, a cute pop song.
Yeah.
Something like Choir Girl, again, there's not just doctors and nurses in that song. It's a song about abortion.
Yeah.
At the time, Don Walker was an incredible songwriter.
He's amazing. Yeah.
Did you feel that people were actually listening to the messages of your song?
I think that at that point, we won a lot of people over, and so there was more people listening to our songs, but there was a lot more people who were buying the songs who weren't listening to the words. So it was sort of, the more popular we got, the less important the lyrics became to the punters.
What about to you?
No, to us it never changed. That's why we'd sing songs about the Star Hotel. For instance, like when we sang about the Star Hotel, I remember Don writing about it. It was the first big riot in Australian history, really, for hundreds of years. The first time people had just said, we've had enough. These were the Star Hotel was a pub where people had really, you know, used to, they had, their jobs were gone, they were picking up their dole checks, they could cash them at the bar and drown their sorrows, and then they were going to take that away from them so they could build a car park. So we were, you know, we did the song about it. And I remember, you know, we never played there. You know? We never played at the Star Hotel. I'd been there, you know, and it was an odd little pub. But I've had people coming up to me who swear they've seen us play at the Star. That night at the Star Hotel when you played there, I was there and you changed my life. And I'm going, we never played there, right? You know, so the lyrics, you know, and a good set of lyrics really shouldn't be too obvious. There should be, you know, you should be able to interpret them,
read lots of different
read what you
things
want in them. You know, I go through phases when if I've done something wrong and you know, and I'm feeling bad, I'll go out and every song I hear on the radio, I go, oh Jesus, how do they know that? You know, everything relates to yourself.
So when you went out on your own as a solo performer, how was the other Jimmy, should we say the Jimmy in your head at that time? Was success the thing that kept driving you forward?
Well, no, but it was well, that was the only way I measured my own worth was if people told me I was great, then I was okay. If I sold records, I was okay. If I was had #1 albums, then I was doing all right. I remember leaving Cold Chisel and just being terrified. I mean, I went from the safety of being in a band with you know, probably, you know, arguably, but I think the best songwriter in Australia, Don Walker, and singing his songs every night to suddenly being out and going, right now I have to write an album. And in the end I get angry, you know. So I was feeling threatened, I was feeling nervous, I was feeling anxious, so I just got aggressive and just hit the guitar harder and wrote songs about boys cry out for war and No Second Prize. No Second Prize was my first single. It became like an anthem for me. It became my mantra as well. It became, you know, there was no option for me except to succeed. And if I didn't succeed, I was gone. So there was no second prize.
And by the time you had that serious heart surgery in 2007,
yeah.
I think you'd already been in rehab once at that time.
Yeah, I had. And you know, listen, nothing could stop me, nothing could make me feel better about myself. You know, I mean, I remember prior to that being in hospital and, you know, with bleeding ulcers in my stomach, you know, from drinking so much. And, you know, halfway through the treatment, getting up out of the St. Vincent's hospital bed, walking up the street with a drip in a gown into the Albury Hotel and drinking 2 double vodkas and walking back, you know. I didn't want to be around. I just wanted to be, I didn't want to feel. I just wanted to be messed up all the time. So heart surgery, it wasn't an alarm bells to me because it was you know, it was genetic. It was an abnormality, but it probably made me realize that I was closer to death than I thought.
So what about the deaths of some of your close friends, leading all the way up to, you know, Steve Prestwich? Mm-hmm. Did that give you a sense that life was short?
I could sort of see why people would want to escape, which should have been alarm bells for me. And you know, I didn't, like I said, I never thought I was suicidal. But you know, I remember when like Bon Scott died, and Bon wasn't suicide, but I remember I was drinking at a party at Vaucluse, and I left the party at 2 or 3 in the morning and went and sat on the heads, you know, at Sydney Harbour alone, drinking, you know, whiskey, and it was pitch black. And I was thinking about Bon going, and I thought about the sense of freedom of not having to think about life anymore. And you know, and I thought to myself, I should go back to the party because this is not good. So there was you know, when friends passed or when I lost people along the way, I was sad. But I saw it at the same time. I thought maybe they'd set themselves free. But I realize now, of course, that, you know, the fact that they didn't set themselves free, they were tortured and might have made a mistake, and when it happened, and all they did was tangle up their families' lives forever, you know, and so really there was no freedom in it at all. And it wasn't until Steve, before Steve died, Steve used to be the guy who was always trying to get Cold Chisel back together. Steve would be going, come on, you know, his Scouse accent, let's get the bloody band back together, you know, it'll be great. And Steve was taken so quickly. You know, he had a brain tumor years before, and had it removed, and then the second one, you know, when he was getting it taken out, it killed him, we didn't expect him to die at all. We just thought we'd all be around forever. We thought, we sort of, you know, you don't appreciate your friends, you know. It's like we just thought, oh, you know, we'll get together another time. We'll get together, you know, in a month and do some songs, you know. But Steve leaving made us realize, you know, we're here for a good time, not a long time. And you know, so now that's why Cold Chisel, now we'll play, if we get a chance, an excuse to get out and play, we'll play, because they're, you know, they're my brothers and we want to play together. You know, it's the best band I've ever played in my life.
So here you are, in your early 60s,
yes.
Still married to Jane,
Yeah.
with kids, with grandkids.
Great-grandkids.
And a great-grandchild or children?
Yeah, boy, not just one.
I'm amazed that you look back on the different people that you've dealt with, including your dear parents, and you don't have a sense of judgment.
I can't blame anybody. You have to sort of be able to look at the conditions that people grow up in and they live in, and you know, everybody's got their own cross to bear, and you know, and they all do the best with what they had, you know. But you know, I mean, you know, as much, but they have to accept responsibility for some of their own actions, the same as I do. And part of my growth from writing this second book is not blaming them. At 16 and 17 years old, I left with Cold Chisel, and the trauma of childhood was gone, and I'm sure it had a knockdown effect on me for the rest of my life. But the responsibility for my decisions from that point on wasn't because of them, it was my decision. So at some point you have to be responsible for your own actions.
Do you think Jimmy Barnes and Cold Chisel could have been as successful, being so kind of passionate and authentic, if you had been clean, clear and sober?
Not a chance. Not a chance. Part of why I was driven like I was, and crazed as I was because of my childhood. You know, when Don would write a song, oh, I want you to feel pain, I knew how to feel pain. I just tapped onto my life. Every thing I sang was a direct, you know, drawn from my own life, and I didn't even know I was doing it. So you know, that made me, you know, want to be successful. You know, a lot of kids that grow up in poverty are overachievers. You know, I was top of my class. I was captain of the football team. I could fight better than anybody. You know, I was trying to be more popular than anybody, and it's a great upbringing if you want to be a rock and roll singer. So you know, all that stuff brought me to where I am, and really everything I've done, even all the mistakes I've made, and you know, since I've grown up, and everything. You know, I could go back and go, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. Oh, God, I wish I hadn't done that.
But it's pointless, isn't it?
There's things I regret, but you know what? I'm okay now, and I'm happy now, and if you know, if I change it, and that might change where I am now. So I'm happy to be here. If I had to go through all that, I'm sorry I had to put other people through it, but if I had to go through it, I'd do it all again.
Jimmy Barnes, it's been such a great pleasure. Thanks for joining me on 1+1.
No worries. See you next book.
That was the rock singer Jimmy Barnes. You can find 1+1 on iView. We have a website where you can watch previous episodes, and you can contact me on Twitter and Facebook. I'll be back here next time. See you then.